Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Ann Kokis, and I'm the CKN professor at the Miller Center. Continuing our celebration of the Miller Center's 50th anniversary, we're excited to have both an esteemed faculty member and alumnus here to speak about U.S.-China relations. The second Trump administration has ushered in a new era of rivalry in U.S.-China competition. This era has been characterized by volatile discussions about tariffs, broader trade issues, and changing global alliances. Today's panel discussion will examine the future of this critical and dynamic relationship made up of the world's two largest economies. Our first panelist, Scott Kennedy, is a senior advisor and trustee chair in business and economics at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C. A leading authority on Chinese economic policy and U.S.-China commercial relations, Kennedy has been traveling to China for 37 years. His ongoing areas of focus include China's innovation drive, Chinese industrial policy, U.S.-China relations, and global economic governance. So for those of you who have questions about what's been happening with your portfolios, he might be a person to ask. His articles have appeared in a wide array of policy, popular, and academic venues, including the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Foreign Affairs, Foreign Policy, and China Quarterly. His major recent publications include Managing U.S.-China Tensions, over the Global Economic Order, Tentative Proposals from CSIS, and U.S.-China Scholarly Recoupling, Advancing Mutual Understanding in an Era of Intense Rivalry with Wang Jisoo. Kennedy hosts the China Field Notes podcast, which features voices on the ground in China. Prior to his time at CSIS, Kennedy was a faculty member at IU Bloomington for 14 years and received his PhD in political science from George Washington University, an MA from Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, and for our purposes, most importantly, a BA from the University of Virginia.
Why?
I first became familiar with Scott's work when I was a Public Intellectuals Fellow through the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations, where he generously hosted our group in 2018 to learn more about the think tank world in Washington, D.C., and have really eagerly followed his work ever since. So it's really wonderful to have you here, Scott. Thank you. Professor Brantley Womack is a professor of foreign affairs emeritus and senior faculty fellow here at the Miller Center. Most recently, he is the author of Recentering Pacific Asia, Regional China and World Order from 2023, and Asymmetry and International Relationships from 2016. Professor Womack is the author of more than 100 journal articles and book chapters on Asian politics, including in World Politics, World Policy Journal, International Affairs, China International Strategy Review, China Quarterly, Pacific Affairs, and the China Journal. He's also an honorary professor at Jilin University in Changchun, China, and at East China Normal University in Shanghai, China. And I should say, also a terrific colleague. Before I came to UVA as a postdoc, the noted Chinese historian Richard Smith said, "You are just going to love working at UVA because one of your colleagues in China studies is going to be Professor Brantley Womack." And I'm very happy that more than 10 years later, I'm able to be here on this panel with him. So let's get started. Now, just to get us going, could each of you offer your view of the current status of bilateral relations between the United States and China? What do we anticipate seeing following the announced meeting of U.S. President Donald Trump with Chinese President and Communist Party General Secretary Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the forthcoming Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Leaders Meeting? And this still appears to be on the horizon despite recent trade tensions. Scott, would you get us started?
Sure. Thanks, Ann. It's great to be here and great to be at the Miller Center with everybody and back in Charlottesville. Technically speaking, the relationship stinks. It's not very good. That's after all that research.
Yeah.
So I think first let's identify the problems. Sort of three big challenges the U.S. and China face with each other. The first is who gets what. We have an economic relationship that's very large, but the U.S. has a large bilateral trade deficit with China. We're worried about Chinese IP theft. We're worried about our domestic industries and manufacturing, lots of those things. And so who gets what is something that we fight a lot over. The second are security interests. The U.S. thinks having a large military presence with allies in Asia helps keep the peace. China thinks what that does is get in the way of reunification with Taiwan, their control of the South China Sea. So we have very different views of the security architecture in the region. Thirdly, all the things in between the econ and the security, the economic security issues, data security, tech transfer, supply chain resilience, all of that stuff when you're interdependent with a strategic rival. The Trump administration's solution to those is to focus on the first one, who gets what. And their big tool, everybody knows, tariffs, right? So April 2nd, Liberation Day, tariffs get jacked up very high on everybody. Markets go wobbly. Your portfolios, you're probably better prepared than me, take a hit. April 9th, the president adjusts, lowers tariffs on everyone else, keeps them on China, then keeps raising. So for the first 3 months, it was the U.S. putting pressure on China in terms of tariffs to address that who gets what issue. And the Chinese, surprisingly, didn't blink. The Chinese retaliated with a variety of things. Their own tariffs, but most importantly, we're all now learning what the word rare earths is. And the Chinese have used that card. We're also learning another word, taco. Trump always chickens out. So the Chinese have made 3 tacos. One was made in Geneva in early May when both sides agreed to lower tariffs. Then a month later, second taco was made in London when the U.S. rolled back some of their new potential export controls. Then the third taco was made in early August in Stockholm when they agreed to extend the ceasefire another 90 days to November 10th and get planning for this meeting, which should happen in a few weeks. Well, that sounds like things have calmed down, but this is the Trump era. So things are going up and down. And just the last few weeks, both sides have been punching back and testing the other. The U.S. at the end of September came out with some new export controls. And then the Chinese, just a few days ago, came out with a whole new feature of export controls around rare earths to globalize the control of them. And so both sides are freaking out, especially in Washington, where I am. And they are trying to figure out if they can still have a meeting. So I think we probably will get to one. I don't know if we'll get another taco or not, but the Chinese are hoping to make one. And so we'll just have to see.
Brantley, what would you like to add there?
Well, I have to say, first of all, I'm so happy to be on a panel with Scott. He is the Energizer Bunny of U.S.-China relations. He spends more time in China than most other China experts, and spends more time in Washington. So he's the expert he's in the trenches on both sides of the Pacific. And so what I've just heard is something that I was looking forward to hearing as soon as we announced the discussion. And what I have to add is backing off from this question of what's happening today, what's happening this year even. And I'd like to emphasize that I'm not going to be trying to present a bright side of things because it does stink. Okay, no question about the relationship. And this rivalry between U.S. and China that has emerged and grown accepted by both sides over the last couple of years especially, and not just from Trump. Remember, Biden continued most of the attitude and most of the policies of the first Trump administration toward China. So that rivalry is there. Why? Well, because ultimately, when we wake up in the morning, we look to see what China's doing. And that's the most important window of vulnerability that we have. And so what China is doing is important not only because of what China does, but because of world influences of China. And we are the two global powers. And when China wakes up in the morning, they look east, strangely enough. And they see us and they're wondering, what are they doing now? This is especially second Trump. And so The question is to reduce the vulnerability involved in that exposure for both sides. And how do you reduce that vulnerability? And one aspect is to make sure the other side behaves the way it should. And you see that particularly in U.S. policy. And now you're seeing the Chinese increasingly having the same type of attitude, and the rare earths policy being probably the best current example of that. But how far can this rivalry go? Are we seeing, maybe scene 2 of a train wreck in scene 4 or something of that sort? I don't think so, because the trains are on different tracks. If you look at, before that, the train, we each need each other. It would be hard to imagine a world without China, though it'd give a lot of satisfaction to people in Washington. But then they'd start trying to go to Costco and Walmart and finding that the shelves were bare. And it would give a lot of, you imagine a lot of relief to China to have the United States disappear. But if it did, what would the consequences be for the global system? What would they do with all their dollars? In a sense, that the structure is something that not only requires an interrelationship, but requires something more. It should have more of a conserving note in that interrelationship than it does at present. So instead of coming train wreck, I would say that both trains are on their own tracks. They're both proceeding in different directions, and each of the trains on their own track faces the possibility of wrecks, or at least bad circumstances. Xi Jinping's putting such a strong hand in domestic politics in China, and his strong production increases another type of problem with both developed countries' economies and with underdeveloped countries' economies, because the infrastructure goods are useful, but then again, there's a sort of smothering of them doing what China did. And the United States, well, we had a very nice session in the Miller Center at the 50th anniversary a couple of weeks ago about problems of presidency in Congress. And I think the domestic problems in the United States are even more severe than the external problems, but the external problems are very severe too.
I mean, this really brings us to another important point. So one of the things, and so what I'm hearing from you, Brantley, is that there's really, while the question of U.S.-China relations is important, perhaps even more important for us to look at right now is what the domestic environment in the United States and what the domestic environment in China are like, and how those affect the global system more broadly.
Yeah.
Now, Scott, you have written extensively about how you see that the United States needs a more coherent China policy. And I was wondering, what are some of the central issues you see there, and who in the current political landscape in the U.S. should be or could be responsible for them? So we see the executive branch, Congress, the states, local governments. I mean, what are you thinking here?
Yeah. Well, I don't think, historically, the U.S. has had a China policy. Yeah. They've written it down. It says China policy, and then they list all the stuff that they want to do. We do not. The president has not given a China speech. Secretary of State has not given a China speech. There's no document. The Defense Department, has been drafting an overall strategy for American defense, and that is not out, and we haven't know what that is. And so first we just need to come up with one, then figure out how to implement it. But if we go back again, the challenges that I mentioned, the economics of who gets what, the security issues, the economic security issues, there's sort of been an evolution in how we've tried to do that, and so there's a variety of choices that we have on the menu that we could pick from. So up through President Obama, the big option that the U.S. saw was we are going to try and integrate China into the international system. It was called engagement. and we are going to have them join institutions. We will have bilateral negotiations. We will become deeply enmeshed, right? And we will need each other, as Brantley describes, and that will soften China's international behavior, maybe soften China up domestically, and that will all work out great. Well, it didn't work out great. It worked out great, actually, for a while, but no good thing lasts. So in any case, the U.S. became impatient with that. President Trump, during his first administration, still wanted to integrate China in the international system. But his tool was not the WTO. It wasn't bilateral politeness. It was tariffs, right? And so if you remember, in June of 2018, right, he raised tariffs 5%. 5%. And we're like freaking out. 5% tariffs. And then he did 10%. And we're like, man, if he could do that now, that would be so nice. So, but so anyway, so he raised tariffs, right? He got the stick, broke the glass, and said we're going to deny access to our market, and that will get them to behave nicely. The deficit will go down, and we will stay integrated. Well, he got a deal on January 15th, 2020, the Phase 1 deal, which didn't do all that, but it was a big deal. It had a big number, and then a week later we got the pandemic. So forget about the Phase 1 deal and everything. Biden, in his 4 years, he still wanted to protect the rules-based international order, right? He still wanted to do that. But he thought there was no way talking to China would get them to adapt and fit in. So throughout the Biden administration, we had how many negotiations with China on this? 0. We never negotiated with China about anything. We talked with them about a lot of stuff, but we never said, if you do X, we'll do Y on any of these issues. Instead, the Biden administration said, okay, we're going to invest at home, CHIPS and Science Act. We will align, collaborate with allies, and we will defend. We will use export controls. We will de-risk, as Brantley described. And that was the strategy, not negotiating, because we figured we just need to deal with it. We need to make sure that China, which will not reform, doesn't hurt us. I think if you had gotten a Harris administration or a second Biden administration, you would have seen an evolution, a continuation of that kind of strategy. Trump has decided, no, we're just going to we're going to negotiate and we're going to use tariffs. We're not going to try and integrate them into that old system because that old system was bad for us. We've just taken a sledgehammer to the rules-based order, and we're going to negotiate arm wrestling style with the Chinese in the back alley, and that's what we're doing. But we can't keep a focus. What do we really, really want? So is it just the deficit? Is it manufacturing that we want? Is it the leadership in advanced technologies? Is it Ukraine, help on Ukraine? Is it help on something else? The president keeps changing his mind, shockingly, week to week. And on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, he promotes one policy, and Tuesday and Thursday it's the other. The weekends it's another thing. Congress, which has been, has a lot of opinions on China, mostly hawkish, but not entirely, has put tape over their mouth. They will not speak up. I mean, they're not speaking up on really anything, right? So left to their own devices, Congress would push back really hard on all of this stuff. We've tracked legislation at CSIS, something like 700 kind of related pieces of legislation in the last 2 Congresses, almost all hawkish. If left to their own devices, they would put up controls even more. But the president has said, I want my deal, so go away for the time being. States over the last few years have enacted lots of legislation about Chinese investment, data security, a whole bunch of things. And left to their own devices, they would put more controls on. We don't know where the president will end up. He could veto all of that and just say, I want my pretty deal, and we'll get a big deal that will include a variety of different things. Or he will just lose his cool and we will get nothing and we will continue to see things. I think when I was a professor at IU, this is the last point, I wasn't allowed to have a policy opinion. I wasn't supposed to let my students know what my opinion was. Right. I was supposed to play poker, right, and then let them decide. I work in a think tank now. I get to have an opinion. Why would you work in a think tank and shape public policy if you didn't have an opinion and want to? So I'm a liberal with a small L, not with a big L. I believe in rules-based order and market democracies, and I think that's good for the world, and we ought to protect that order. And I think what we're doing right now, taking a sledgehammer to it and not collaborating with our allies to protect that order, is against our interests. It's what is allowing tacos to be made on a regular basis. And to me, we're going backwards right now. So I also am, besides a liberal, I'm a Taoist, policy Taoist.
A real China scholar.
Yeah, real China scholar. So I think, so I've been in DC now 11 years. I think if we had done nothing the last 11 years, we might be better off than where we are today.
So you heard it here, folks. We're bringing some optimism to the Miller Center today, but this is one of the big challenges in this moment. That it's really a dynamic and challenging time, and with a lot of different moving pieces. Now, Brantley, speaking of moving pieces, your recent book, Recentering Pacific Asia: Regional China and the World Order, focuses on China's role as a regional power. So we've been talking about U.S.-China, but I know you've done extensive work on China and its interactions with our allies in the Asia-Pacific region. So how does that further complicate this picture?
Well, perhaps after Scott's description of U.S.-China mud wrestling on the major stage, the idea of China being a regional power, only a regional power, might sound promising. That maybe we're going to win the mud wrestle or whatever. But actually, you have to look at the region. And my idea of the region is Pacific Asia. This is Asia from the Koreas, Japan, Greater China, that's Taiwan, Hong Kong, Macau, mainland, and Southeast Asia. If you look at the economies of those, they're larger altogether than the economies of United States plus Europe. And you might think, well, sure, you add a whole bunch of things together, you're going to get a big number, so what difference is that? That's not a region. Oh, it's not a region? Let's look at the intra-regional trade, percentage of intra-regional trade in this Pacific Asia versus the EU or versus North America. It's larger in Pacific Asia. So it is not only a large region, it's a interconnected region. I think that China is the largest trading partner of these countries. And it's even more interconnected than those bottom line numbers suggest, because the way it's interconnected is not China making something altogether and selling it to Japan, or Japan doing that to China. It's these global value chains. It's Silicon Valley coming up with something and selling innovation to Japan, and Japan contacting Taiwan and having prototypes made or serious parts of electronics made, taking those to China. China assembles these, adds a lot of components now. It used to be just the made in China of iPhones in the old days was like last seen in China, not serious China inputs. Now there's more serious China inputs. But still, it's that whole process. You think, okay, well, that's interconnection. That's more serious interconnection than if it was just country-to-country trade of final products, because every step depends on the other steps. And the U.S. market is important to this whole region, but it's not the only market. And the internal market, China's largest trading partner last year was ASEAN, was the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. And that's comparable. It trades neck and neck with U.S., ASEAN, Europe. But that's a very significant pattern there. So what does ASEAN think, or Japan, or Taiwan think, and watching the mud wrestling in center stage? Well, what smaller countries don't want is uncertainty. And they're getting a lot of uncertainty, and the uncertainty seems to be putting their interests at risk. What the Trump administration seems to be doing is monitorizing the U.S. centrality to the world economy. And that it's, in a sense, checking out of the direction of the world economy, is trying to monitorize the public services that a structured world economy provides. And that is something that's deeply unsettling even to allies. It's not that they want to cling to China instead, because they're close to China. Being close to China doesn't make you feel comfortable. Being close to China makes you feel dependent, and you want to modify, to buffer that dependence on China with a good relationship to the United States and a good relationship to the rest of the region and a good relationship to the rest of the world. But if the United States is unreliable, then that's a problem. If you look at Taiwan, it's a perfect example of all.
And when I was in Japan, I saw the exact same thing, where my Japanese colleagues were like, "It's great to talk with you. Can you tell us what's happening in Washington? And can you tell us about not just U.S.-Japanese policy, U.S.-Japan policy, but U.S. policy in Southeast Asia, so that when we're doing investments and deals, we can actually move forward in some sort of a reliable way." And this is, a very reliable partner that really is starting to wonder in a lot of ways. So I think it's a really important point. So now, one of the things I wanted to be sure that we could talk about, since we're here at a university and educating folks on these issues, is the role that we see that, and we have a special guest here from China visiting. One of the things that I wanted to ask was, you've both been heavily involved in academic exchange between China and the United States. And Scott, you are really taking this seriously also as a research topic. You wrote a terrific 2024 report on U.S.-China scholarly recoupling. Brantley, you recently served as a visiting faculty member at Schwarzman College in Tsinghua. Why, in your views, is maintaining these scholarly connections so important in this era of high turbulence?
So I guess the first thing I should just go back about my Taoist remark. So I would say, we do need policy. We need to do stuff, and you can't just let things go on cruise control. The question is, can we get smart policy? And I do think, even with all the challenges of DC, we can get better policy and manage the relationship. And I guess China is a big, giant challenge. So as much as the uncertainty that Brantley mentions worries about us, China's not making it easy for anybody else. And I guess because of all that, I'm a believer in scholarly exchange, which I started when I was a student here in third year, went to study abroad in Beijing and traveled around, and that was in 1988. So I've been doing that a long time. And you've traveled, other people here have, you can't know a place unless you travel, if you learn the language. And the same for Chinese, right? We've had, I think we're at the height of, just before the pandemic, there were 369,000 Chinese students in the United States. We're down to 240. It's dropped a lot. That's still way more. There's only 3,000 American students on the ground in China now. We are very different cultures, very different societies, very different politics, very different norms. But we all want better for our families. We all live on a planet with finite resources. So we're both big and powerful. We got to figure out how to manage the relationship, and some ways get along. And we've got climate and a bunch of other issues. So we better understand each other. And plus, it's interesting and fascinating place. And America's a fascinating place. And there's a lot of fun stuff to do. So it's worth going back and forth. And my main research method is called jet lag. And so during the pandemic, I wasn't able to use that research method. And it was very upsetting, mostly for my wife, because I was in my basement. And so she was very happy. I was the first American scholar to go back to China in 2022. And I got to enjoy 26 days of quarantine. Because, again, the alone time was really invaluable. You could focus on your reading and writing and all of that stuff. But once you got out, you realized this place had changed. It hadn't just frozen in time for the 3 years that we weren't there. There was new fashion, there were new hobbies, they had new views about the United States. They're driving electric cars.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things happening.
And there were no other foreigners to be seen.
Well, not from the United States. My American friends, they had usually had other American friends and Europeans that they hung out, and now their friends were Mongolian, Uzbeki, from Kyrgyzstan. And so the country keeps changing, and we keep changing. And it's no surprise to me that the relationship has gotten worse when we haven't been communicating with each other as much. Because you just begin to assume the worst because you don't have any other evidence, and then you have these two echo chambers in both places. And so just simply to be aware of what's going on and communicate, and you'd be shocked about the crazy things that the Chinese think we think about them, and vice versa, the things that they think we think about them, and then you try to explain it. And going and traveling and communicating isn't just for panda huggers. It's also for people, I think it's more important for hawks to go to China. I've been trying to persuade a lot of members of Congress to get on an airplane and go stand in front of Xi Jinping and tell him why what they're doing with regard to Hong Kong or with fentanyl or thinking about doing to Taiwan is really bad for the world. And it's not just a political campaign slogan that people are bringing this up for. And for them to hear what the Chinese have to say and get the Chinese here. So that's really vital for us to do. I don't see the relationship and world peace being able to be managed if we are fully ignorant of each other. I just don't think ignorance is a great strategy.
I think here at the Miller Center, with our focus on learning about presidential strategy, we would be inclined to strongly agree with you there on that. Brantley, would you like to?
I'd just like to underline 2 points about that. One is that terrible effect of COVID on personal relationships. I'm sure each of us have had, that effect. And think about the more distant the relationships, and what can be more distant than U.S.-China relationships, and the effect of that lack of personal contact. I taught in China, in Beijing, 2 weeks after COVID ended in China. And it was, people were in a situation like they were wandering about in the light after coming out of a cave, And it was the interpersonal relationships, but the relationships between nations. I was at Tiananmen on a Sunday, and I saw 2 other obvious foreigners, and that was in this giant place in China. It was like being back in the early 80s. So this lack of contact is important. And the second thing I'd emphasize is what security and additional security has done to the whole prospect of relationships in the United States and in China. That on both sides, the problem with security is that every time you think you need a little bit more security, every time you feel security, you ratchet up, but it never ratchets back. Okay, so you have these increasing controls. The universities in China used to allow people to come in. COVID, they had all sorts of restrictions, so you had to have permission to come into university. They still have those COVID restrictions. And here you have all sorts of problems with faculty, with students abroad, with faculty continuing relationships. And it's really, fortunately, the 10-year visas for tourist visas that Obama set up still remain alive on both sides of the Pacific. But still, the situation is terrible. The situation before COVID wasn't great, but the situation now, the interpersonal situation, and we're dealing with relations among peoples and people, is something that needs to be addressed.
Well, one of the reasons we're here today is to make sure we can have a lot of open discussion about these important issues. So I want to be sure to leave time for our audience members to ask questions about their thoughts on, for our 2 experts. And if we have any audience questions that we can bring up. If you can pass your cards to the center, and I will be sure to make sure that those get asked to our experts. Thank you. And again, you should have cards next to you. So if you have further questions, please feel free to write those questions there and we'll have people pick them up. All right, so, okay. We've got some good ones already to start.
Those are for you, Scott.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to
Hard
figure out.
ones for him.
Yeah.
Hard ones for him.
All right. So I would say this is one that we really need to talk about. Can either of you comment on the current U.S. relationship with Taiwan? Who wants to get started?
Okay, let me start on this one.
It's the hard ones.
It's the hard ones, I know. Well, this is being a professor emeritus. You have. Thank you.
Historically, and practically from the time of Nixon's visit in 1972, the relationship of the attitude of the United States toward the cross-straits relationship, and it's called the cross-straits relationship because both sides claim to be China. So how do you call it the China-Taiwan relationship? Then you cause problems. If you treat China as a country, you cause problems on the mainland side. So cross-straits relationship. What is the American attitude toward that? And the wording in Nixon's 1972 communique is a little vague, even though it says, both sides.
Put it mildly.
There's one China, and hey, who are we to say otherwise? Essentially, so strategic ambiguity has been the policy. Under Trump, he hasn't really. Actually, Biden sided more on the strategic ambiguity, maybe side. Toward Taiwan. Trump is more transactional ambiguity, which means that he does things that would make the Taiwan side happy. He does things that make the mainland side happy. And it depends on whether it's a Monday or a Wednesday or a Tuesday or a Thursday to see what the indication of the administration is. Is the administration planning to fully support Taiwan? In the ambiguity on one side, it doesn't look that likely right now. Is it going to fully support? Is it going to say that it will not support Taiwan in a conflict, in cross-straits conflict? It's not likely to say that either. So tactical ambiguity is a wavering version of strategic ambiguity, and that's likely to continue. So let me stop there and go to Scott.
I'll give you my punchline first, which is I don't think there's going to be a war. Right, it's the most important thing. But it's good to be nervous and good to be vigilant. So when I was on the plane going to China because to enjoy some alone time, I actually went through Taipei. It was the easiest way to get to China is actually to fly to Taiwan and then from Taiwan to China. So I'm on the plane in San Francisco, get on the plane. And this is late August 2022, right? There's no one going around in airports.
Yeah.
This plane was full of kids.
Oh.
I'm like, what are all these kids doing on the plane? Like 12 and 13-year-old kids. So I find they're wearing baseball caps.
Oh.
These are the Chinese Taipei Little League baseball team coming back from Williamsport to Taipei. And the pilot gets on and says, "We got the Chinese Taipei." I think. We were on United Airlines, so it wasn't Chinese Airlines, so I think he said the Taiwanese team or something like that. Cool. So, and the plane was still allowed to take off and everything. So, in any case, these kids were so cute. Yeah. And they got off the plane. They had to deal with putting the apps on their phone and filling out all the information with their parents and the coaches. And I thought, this was really interesting. So I go through quarantine there, I go through quarantine in China, then I'm out and about in China, and I thought, this is a really interesting thing. So I started asking Chinese. I said, I was on the plane with all these kids.
Oh, yeah.
Is that your team? Are these kids playing for you? Because it's the Chinese Taipei team, right? And there's only one correct answer in China to that question. Yeah. Yes, of course they are our team. You cannot, because Taiwan is a part of China, right? Technically speaking. Right? So, but that's not the answer I got. Oh. I got what? Baseball? kids baseball?
Yeah,
What are you talking about? And then they're like, well, I guess if they're playing against the Americans, we would root for them. Just like they're from Manila or from Bangkok or something like that. And then occasionally people would be like,
And it would have been different with ping pong.
yeah. Look, and then the basic answer was, they're not our team. Which was an admission that these are two different places, right? Whether it's caused by the U.S. military or geopolitics, people recognize that these are two different societies, right? And so that's the problem. The problem isn't that how much support the U.S. military is giving or the Chinese. These are two different societies that had to figure out that they're on the planet together. And so that's the challenge, is of figuring out that they haven't, especially the Chinese, haven't figured out that they're going to have to become adults on this. And so that's this identity challenge is the big one, and that's not going away. It's actually, Taiwanese are getting even more feeling that they are Taiwanese and actually have very little Chineseness to their identity, increasingly. But despite that, I think the likelihood of war is very low, because the level of mutual deterrence is crazy high. And we hear about all the Chinese planes and ships. There are American planes and ships up there all at the same time. They just don't get reported on. And the level of interdependence is crazy high. If TSMC, the world's most important company, goes dark, the whole world, including the Chinese, suffer dramatically. That's not a reason that the deterrence is, but there's a lot of costs to everybody. And I think China's strategy is, hopefully they think the balance of power will eventually shift. We'll get bored, we'll lose our commitment, and the Taiwanese will go, okay, we'll sign a piece of paper. We're still very, very far from that, and we may not get there. So I think in the short term, this is not a war that the Chinese need to fight. They got a bunch of other problems. So I think the risk has gone from maybe doubled from 2% to 4%. That's still 96%. I'll take the 96%.
Well, and let me add a dimension to that strengthens that prediction. That is the economic dimension. 5% of Taiwan's population is living on the mainland, working on jobs in Shanghai and in Fujian and other places. And China's Taiwan's largest trading partner. And so we tend to concentrate in the U.S. on the security relationship. And actually, when you're in China talking to people, they're not talking that much about the security relationship. And when they talk their politics is about local politics in Taiwan. So it's another reason for the jet lag treatment. You go there, you have a very different experience. Right. Even before you get the jet lag, in the case of your trip.
Yeah, even on the plane. No, and I think this is a really important thing to note. And one thing that I would also urge all of you to do is, if you're interested in more of this, our colleague Shirley Lin wrote a terrific book called Taiwan's China Dilemma, so you can check that out if you want to learn more about this Taiwan question. So building on that trade discussion, one of the questions we have from our audience members is, what is China doing with their relationships with U.S. allies and rivals? China seems to have many options to influence the U.S. indirectly, and the example that's being used here is investment in Panama, in the Panama Canal. So I was wondering if either of you could comment on that.
I'll briefly. I think Brantley has followed this probably more carefully than me, but certainly the Chinese are trying to invest globally around the world. That is partly smart diplomatic strategy to build relations and create some dependencies. It's also, they're trying to move up the value-added chain, and so they're trying to move production of toys and apparel and all that stuff to other places. They're trying to create new markets for themselves. So there's a lot of reasons for them to go around the world and spread their wealth. So we are seeing that, and although we have a new report coming out in a couple weeks on the electric vehicle industry and how the Chinese investment all over Latin America and other places is generating real changes in those countries' economies, and the U.S. is mostly an observer to that. That said, despite all of the economic weight and gravity that the Chinese are moving around, they're not creating a lot of love for China. China's soft power is not rising dramatically as a result of this. They could take advantage of the U.S.'s efforts to impose tariffs on everyone and the sort of indications of disrespect that we show and the less support for our allies. But they're not taking advantage of this. And we know that they are not because the EU had a big summit with China at the end of July in China, and it went from 2 days to 1 day, and they were supposed to agree to a long list of things, and they did not. The Europeans are very upset about China's support for Russia and Ukraine, the selling of electric vehicles and other things being dumped in Europe, sanctions on Europeans for their support of Xinjiang, a lot of issues. And the Chinese could, in 10 seconds, make most of that go away and pull Europe closer. Their relationship with Japan could be a lot better. We're not doing a great job of managing that. And the same in other places. But there's a key element of Chinese foreign policy. I don't know if Brantley agrees with me. They never pay it forward. They never invest in a relationship ahead of without knowing what they're going to get in return. They want it to be a quid pro quo, and so spending in advance, hoping and being nice, they would gain a lot. But they want to find the least expensive price to make sure that Europe and Japan and the others don't side entirely with us. So as long as they're in the middle, wavering, as Brantley mentioned, and worried about the uncertainty as he described, that's good enough for them. But they are not doing as much as they could, and actually that gives the U.S. A chance, even with all of the strategic and tactical blunders we're making. This is still open opportunity for us if we got our act together.
Just add two things on that. One is that the Chinese word for their approach to relationships, win-win, fits that idea. It's both sides looking for some gain, but of course that first win is China. And the problem with the second win is that for the countries dealing with China, especially neighbors, but everybody really, that joining that win-win relationships makes them more dependent on China. And then what is their concern? So more and more dependent on China is a problem. On the other hand, something that sometimes you get the impression that China is very aggressive, and it really does a fairly cautious policy for the resources that it has. It doesn't want surprises. It really is not adventurous. Putin is a wonder to them. He's very un-Chinese, and so
because he's willing to take a lot of chances. And
so it's these two factors. So it's not forming alliances; it's forming relationships. It's forming partnerships. The partnerships are based on China's win first, other sides win also.
So it's good to hear that there are actually spaces for growth in U.S.-China policy. That some places for us to grow from. Now, Scott, this is a question for you in relation to some of your earlier comments, and I'm actually really curious about this too. Okay. So the question is, what are the things we think they think, and vice versa? You had said that we would be shocked. So what are some things that came to your mind when you made that earlier comment?
I guess one personal thing and one policy thing. So on the personal level, I think they believe that we all, that we're individualists, right? And it's all about personal freedom, and like family doesn't matter and things like that. And that's obviously not true. Yes, we do a lot of things for ourselves, but so do they. The Chinese it's not all about the group, right? But in any case, so we have communitarian spirit, right? And that is important and has a big effect on our politics. And I think that's a stereotype of Americans that is actually still in China. I also think that their view, a dominant view, now maybe this is official propaganda, but you also hear it from talking to people, is you hear Chinese constantly say, you just won't let us be number one. No matter what, you won't let us be successful. You will always want to contain us no matter what. And I think there is a portion of the American political system that believes that it is about maintaining American primacy. But I think there's a lot of people that genuinely believe the challenge isn't how China rises or how powerful it is, but how it uses that power, how it behaves. Mm-hmm. So if it were to play according to the rules and the norms, even if it won in certain instances, that'd be okay if it followed those norms. So I think that there's a variety of reasons. It's not just one giant conspiracy to keep China down. And I think our view that China, no matter what we do, is going to always do the wrong thing. That they're always going to be the most aggressive. That everything is inevitable. That if you go back long enough, you'll find things the Chinese have written that say they want to be world dominant. Restore their glory from the Tang Dynasty or whatever revival of the Middle Kingdom, and nothing we do is going to change that. Just because we put restrictions on them, that has no effect. And I do think actually it's an interactive relationship. At the end of the day, there's a lot of things the Chinese do, including some of these latest export controls on rare earths and the over-securitization, which are a reaction to what we're doing. And so we both are codependent, but we are also pushing each other. We're pushing each other's buttons in the worst places to get the worst reaction out of the other side. And so I think those are kind of the type of things that I think of when I think of misperception.
I mean, I think those are all really well observed, and Brantley, I want to give you the chance to jump on that, or if not,
I'd just say that in this interaction between China and the United States, there's this veil of ignorance and a black curtain in between that we're hitting through, and that is opaque if we don't understand the other side, and we don't have context on the other side. So we're not really seeing China. We're looking in the China direction, but we're seeing our ignorance, our anxieties. We're not seeing what China is actually doing because we don't really know China. We don't have that experience. And when we do, the three of us have a little bit more of that experience. Things look a lot more complicated, a lot more intense, and actually more hopeful to proceed in the right direction.
Well, I hope and I share your optimism. I hope and I share your optimism. This last question may not move us in that optimistic direction, but I think it is a really important one to address for our audience. So when looking at China's security agreement with Hong Kong and what we've seen since 1997, what are your thoughts on where we are right now and what we can look for over the next 20 years until 2047?
Are you talking about, first of all, Hong Kong? Remember that Hong Kong returned to China in 1997. And why did it return? It was a peaceful return. Did the British decide to get generous? No, they don't do that. What they did was they ran out a 99-year lease that had been done between the British Empire and the Qing dynasty. And that lease was done just to provide a fig leaf for the consolidation and expansion of British presence in Hong Kong since 1840. They wanted to move beyond the island, Victoria Island, to the rest of this territory. And so they wanted a lease on that territory. Were the terms of the lease fair? No, and they weren't kept by the Brits either. The very few restrictions, the walled city within Hong Kong, for instance, that was supposed to remain Qing dynasty, It remained different, but not Qing dynasty control, really. So you had this reversion of Hong Kong to China, and the question was, what would happen? And would in the last few years of British control in Hong Kong, they tried to become more democratic. It was a colony. It was a real colony. There was not a democracy in Hong Kong beforehand. The rules for democratizing started being put in. And then the first few years, so the first 10 years of Hong Kong's reversion, people were basically optimistic about changes, economic changes, but also political change. Then the Hong Kong economies stagnated, and you started having more unrest, and the fact of greater mainland presence in Hong Kong of all sorts, tourists, people buying up goods in Hong Kong, created all sorts of frictions, like you would in a tourist city in the U.S. You know, if you live in a Florida city and it's weekend when all the college students come or something like that. It's like that type of problem. And then on top of that, you had demonstrations, and then top government in Beijing decides those demonstrations should not last and should not have been treated as nicely as they were, and you have new security laws. But there's still a frontier. We tend to assume when we're not in Hong Kong that Hong Kong is just subject to mainland Chinese rules, but there's still a lot of autonomy in Hong Kong education, Hong Kong government, etc. It's just that frontier of national security, which is a national government thing, keeps being pushed down. And Hong Kong feels that oppression because it didn't exist there before. And Taiwan wonders what would happen to them in reunification.
So we have 30 seconds left. Scott, I can give you either 30 seconds to respond, or if you don't want to take that. Okay, great.
Yeah. I'm less optimistic about Hong Kong. I mean, I think that you have vibrant people, very entrepreneurial. They'll figure it out, right? They will figure it out. But in the trips I've taken over the last few years, things have not looked very, very bright. I went for a 10-day research trip in 2023, and the wounds of the national security law and the protests were still visible. Deep rifts between liberals, whose vision of Hong Kong is as autonomous, and conservatives who wanted to be integrated with loyalty to the party in Beijing. The conservatives had won, but the liberals were still quite upset and stressed out. And the signs of erosion in governance, in the economy. You go to bookstores. Bookstores in Hong Kong we used to all go to buy all the cool books with all the gossip about what's going on in mainland politics. All those books are all gone. It's not like you're inside the mainland entirely. There's still differences, but the trend is clear. When I went back in July, all of that tension had dissipated. And that's because the conservatives have not only won, but they are feeling victorious, and the liberals have given up. They've either left, or they've just said, we're just going to stuff it, and we'll get along in the daily lives. And there are a lot of quiet heroes protecting their workers, their students, their faculty, their families, to keep space for them. And I guess the other thing that's happened is the Hong Kong stock market's way up. And that's partly the trade war. Yeah. And our threats that we might take down the 286 Chinese companies listed on New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ, and they go back and list in Hong Kong. So the wounds have started to heal, and then the economy is doing better. But it feels like an antiseptic Hong Kong, not the exciting, different. I know it wasn't a democracy before, but it still had a different feel to it.
It wasn't very political before.
Yeah. So in any case, it's Xi Jinping's Hong Kong.
Yeah. So I feel like at a very minimum, this has left us with a lot that we need to talk about at a future iteration. Let's give Brantley and Scott a big round of applause.
Thanks.
And Scott, we hope that you can come back to the Miller Center again. It's been a pleasure
Anytime.
having you
Thank
here.
you, Ann.
All right, thank you so much.
All right.